The stars had watched humanity's shame 10,000 years ago. They watched again now, silent and cold, as the greatest fleet ever built by human hands prepared to correct an ancient wrong. Elder Councilman Os had been only a child when the last human ship vanished into the dark. His species, lived for thousands of years, and he remembered that day with perfect clarity. He remembered the celebrations in the streets of the conquered capital. He remembered his father lifting him onto his shoulders so he could see the parade. He remembered the speeches about how the galaxy was finally safe from the dangerous young species that bred too fast and thought too boldly. Now Os stood in the Concord's grand observation chamber, watching sensor data that made no sense. His hands trembled. His heart's beat in a rhythm of pure fear. "This cannot be accurate," he whispered to the technician beside him. "Run the scan again." The technician, a young with scales the color of copper, shook her head slowly. "We have run it 17 times, Elder. The readings are correct. The human fleet numbers 12,416 vessels. The smallest is twice the size of our largest battleship. The largest is—" she paused, her voice failing her. "The largest is the size of a small moon." Os closed his eyes. He thought of his father, long dead now, and wondered what the old fool would say if he could see this moment. The Conquered had exiled humanity to die. They had given them barren moons with thin atmospheres and poisoned soil. They had taken away their technology, their culture, their history. They had even burned the great libraries of Earth so that future human generations would forget what they had been. And somehow, impossibly, humanity had not only survived but had become something beyond imagination. The story of humanity's exile was taught to every child in conquered space. It was a lesson in the wisdom of the elder species. 10,000 years ago, humans had been a young and troublesome race. They spread too quickly across their corner of the galaxy. They asked too many questions. They challenged ideas that had stood for millions of years. They looked at the ancient ways of the conquered and dared to suggest improvements. The elder species had gathered in council and decided that humanity posed a threat to galactic stability. Not a military threat. Humans had barely mastered basic space travel at that point. No, the threat was more subtle and more dangerous. Humans threatened to change things. They threatened to make the old powers feel old. So the conquered had acted. They came to Earth with a fleet of 10,000 ships and told humanity that their planet was being designated as a conservation zone. The blue world was too beautiful, too ecologically significant, to be left in the hands of such a careless species. Humanity would be relocated to the outer reaches, to a cluster of moons that the conquered had no use for. The humans had protested. They had begged. Some had even tried to fight. But their weapons were nothing against conquered technology, and their pleas fell on deaf ears. Over the course of 3 terrible years, every human being was rounded up and shipped to their new home. 8 billion people, packed into transport ships like cargo, watching their world shrink behind them. The conquered had expected humanity to die slowly in the outer reaches. The moons were harsh and unforgiving. Resources were scarce. The technology left to the humans was primitive by conquered standards. Most species would have dwindled away within a few generations, becoming nothing more than a footnote in galactic history. But humans were not most species. In the first century of exile, millions died. The harsh conditions claimed the old and the young with cruel efficiency. Food was scarce. Water had to be extracted from rock and ice. Diseases swept through the cramped habitats like wildfire. It was a time of suffering that would have broken any other people. Instead, it forged humanity into something new. The survivors learned to work together in ways they never had on Earth. Old divisions of nation and culture became meaningless when everyone was struggling to breathe the same thin air. Scientists and engineers worked around the clock to improve their technology, to find new ways to grow food, to make the moons livable. Artists and storytellers preserved their history through oral tradition, since the conquered had burned their books and destroyed their digital archives. And through it all, they remembered Earth, Parents told their children stories of blue skies and green forests. They described oceans so vast you could sail for weeks without seeing land. They spoke of mountains that touched the clouds and deserts that stretched to the horizon. Earth became more than a memory. It became a promise, a sacred vow passed down through generations. One day, humanity would return. The second century brought stability. The moons were terraformed, slowly and painfully, through technologies that humans invented out of pure necessity. Where the conquered had given them scraps, humanity built wonders. They developed new forms of energy generation that were cleaner and more efficient than anything the elder species had created. They engineered crops that could grow in any condition. They learned to recycle every atom of waste into something useful. By the third century, the exiled humans were thriving. Their population had recovered and begun to grow. Their cities spread across the moons, connected by networks of tunnels and transit systems. Their scientists made breakthrough after breakthrough, driven by a hunger for knowledge that bordered on obsession. The conquered never bothered to check on them. Why would they? The outer reaches were a wasteland, far from any trade routes or points of interest. The elder species had already forgotten about the troublesome young race they had cast out. Humanity had become a story told to frighten children. Behave, or you will end up like the humans. If only they had known. By the 5th century, human technology had surpassed the conquereds in many areas. By the 7th century, it had surpassed them in all areas. By the 10th century, humanity possessed capabilities that the elder species would have called magic or impossible. They developed faster-than-light drives that could cross the galaxy in days rather than months. They built ships with shields that could withstand the heat of a star's surface. They created weapons that could crack planets open like eggs, though they prayed they would never have to use them. They extended there through genetic engineering and cybernetic enhancement. They learned to communicate across vast distances instantaneously, linking their civilization into a single unified whole. And throughout it all, they never forgot their purpose. Every scientific advance was measured against a single question: will this help us go home? The Council of Exiles met in the great chamber beneath the surface of refuge, the largest of the moons that had become humanity's new home. The chamber was carved from living rock and lit by soft bioluminescent panels that cast everything in a gentle blue glow. At the center stood a holographic image of Earth, rotating slowly, heartbreakingly beautiful. Admiral stood before the assembled representatives. She was tall and lean, with silver hair cut short and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of generations. Her family had served in humanity's military for 7 generations, going back to her great-great-great-grandmother, who had been a young lieutenant on the day of the exile. "The scouts have returned," said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "They have mapped conquered space extensively. They have observed the elder species and their ways. They have confirmed what we suspected." She pressed a control, and the image of Earth was replaced by a galaxy map covered in markers and annotations. "The conquered has grown complacent," continued. "They have not innovated in thousands of years. Their technology is the same as it was when they exiled us. Their military is designed to intimidate, not to fight. They have faced no true challenge in so long that they have forgotten what challenge means." A murmur ran through the chamber. The representatives looked at each other with a mixture of hope and fear. "Our fleet is ready," said. 12,000 ships, each one more powerful than anything the conquered possesses. We have enough force to sweep through their space like a storm and take whatever we want. We could burn their worlds and scatter their people just as they did to us." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But that is not who we are. That is not who we have become." Stepped closer to the holographic display, reaching out as if to touch the blue marble that represented their lost home. "The exile was meant to destroy us. Instead, it taught us the value of unity. It taught us that survival means nothing without purpose. It taught us that strength without wisdom is just another form of weakness. She turned back to face the council. We will return to Earth. We will reclaim what was stolen from us, but we will not become the monsters that our enemies were. We will offer peace to those who accept it. We will remove only those who resist. And when it is done, we will build something better than the conquered ever dreamed. The vote was unanimous. After 10,000 years, humanity was finally going home. 3 days later, the fleet launched. 12,000 ships rose from their docks and gathered in formation above the moons that had been humanity's prison and crucible and home. For a long moment, they hung there in silence, a constellation of purpose against the endless black. Then, as one, they folded space and vanished. The journey that would have taken the conquered months was accomplished in hours. The fleet emerged from fold space at the edge of conquered territory, their sensors drinking in data about a civilization that had not changed in 10. Everything was as the scouts had reported. The conquered was old and tired and soft. Their border defenses were laughable. Their patrol ships were antiques. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Remembrance, watching the stars stream past as her fleet advanced. Beside her stood a holographic display showing Earth's location, still weeks away at their current pace. They would not rush. They would not strike from the shadows. Humanity would come as conquerors, yes, but they would come openly, giving the conquered every chance to surrender peacefully. Not because they were weak, not because they were merciful, but because they remembered what it felt like to be helpless before a greater power, and they refused to inflict that same trauma without at least offering an alternative. The conquered's border sensors detected them 3 days before they arrived. Warning messages flashed across 1,000 worlds. Emergency councils convened. Military commanders scrambled to respond. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the elder species felt something they had nearly forgotten how to feel. Fear. Admiral Aura of the Dominion Navy had served the conquered for 200 years. She had commanded fleets in a dozen minor conflicts, suppressing rebellions and enforcing the will of the elder species across 100 systems. She had never lost a battle. She had never even come close. When the report reached her flagship, she read it 3 times before believing it. 12,000 human ships, technology beyond anything in conquered records, a fleet so vast that it blotted out the stars wherever it traveled. Her first instinct was to laugh. The humans had been exiled with nothing. They had been sent to die on barren moons at the edge of the galaxy. The idea that they had somehow built a civilization capable of challenging the conquered was absurd. It had to be a sensor malfunction. It had to be some kind of trick. But as the hours passed and more reports came in, laughter became impossible. Long-range visual scans showed ships of impossible size and elegant design. Energy readings indicated power sources that made conquered reactors look like primitive fires. Communication intercepts revealed a language that had evolved over, full of references to concepts and technologies that Aura could not begin to understand. The humans were real. The humans were coming, and there was nothing in the conquered's arsenal that could stop them. Aura gathered what forces she could. 300 ships, the best the Dominion Navy had to offer in the border region. She knew it would not be enough. She knew she was leading her people to their deaths. But what choice did she have? The conquered was built on the idea that the elder species were supreme, that no younger race could ever challenge their authority. If she retreated without a fight, that idea would shatter forever. So she flew to meet the humans, her fleet arranged in perfect formation, her weapons primed, her crew ready to die for a cause they no longer believed in. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 11 minutes. Human weapons cut through conquered shields like they were not there. Human ships moved with a speed and precision that made Aura's best pilots look like children. Within seconds, half her fleet was disabled, their systems fried by electromagnetic pulses that left the crews alive but helpless. The other half tried to fight back, launching volleys of plasma and missiles that the human ships simply absorbed without visible effect. Aura ordered a retreat, but it was too late. Human vessels surrounded her flagship, their weapons powered but not firing. A communication request blinked on her console. She accepted it with trembling hands. The face that appeared on her screen was human. A woman with silver hair and eyes that held no hatred, only a kind of tired determination. Behind her, Aura could see the bridge of a ship that dwarfed her own flagship many times over. "I am Admiral of the Human Reclamation Fleet," the woman said. "Your ships are disabled but intact. Your crews are alive. We have no wish to harm anyone who does not force us to." Aura found her voice. "What do you want?" "We want to go home," replied simply. "We want to return to Earth, the world that was stolen from us 10,000 years ago. We want to be recognized as equals in this galaxy. And we want the conquered to stop treating younger species the way they treated us. The High Council will never accept those terms." "Then the High Council will be replaced." His voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "We are not here to negotiate. We are here to inform. Humanity is returning. Anyone who stands in our way will be moved aside. Anyone who accepts our presence peacefully will be left in peace." She leaned forward slightly, and for a moment Aura saw something ancient and fierce in her eyes. "We have had 10,000 years to prepare for this moment. We have built ships that can crack your planets open. We have weapons that can turn your stars into bombs. We have the power to do to the conquered exactly what the conquered did to us." A pause. "But we choose not to, because we remember what it felt like to be helpless, because we know that revenge only creates more pain, because we want to be better than the species who exiled us." Straightened. "Go back to your masters. Tell them what you have seen. Tell them that humanity is coming home and nothing in this galaxy can stop us. But also tell them that we come in hope of peace. The choice of how this ends is theirs." The communication cut off. Aura sat in silence for a long time, staring at the dark screen. Around her, her officers waited for orders, but she had none to give. What could she possibly say? What could anyone say in the face of such overwhelming power and such unexpected mercy? She gave the order to limp back to conquered space. Her crippled fleet limped through the void, carrying news that would shake the galaxy to its foundation. The High Council convened in emergency session when Aura's report arrived. The 12 elder species that had ruled the galaxy for millions of years gathered in their ancient chamber, surrounded by the symbols of their power and the weight of their history. They argued and debated and shouted at each other for days, unable to agree on anything except that this was the greatest crisis they had ever faced. Some called for surrender. The humans were too powerful to fight, better to accept their terms than to face annihilation. Others called for desperate measures. The conquered had weapons sealed away since the last Great War, planet killers and star burners that had been forbidden for. Perhaps these could turn the tide. A few even suggested negotiation, offering the humans some of what they wanted in exchange for leaving the rest of conquered space alone. But in the end, pride won out over wisdom. The conquered had ruled for too long to accept the idea that a species they had exiled could now dictate terms to them. They voted to resist, to throw everything they had at the human fleet, to show the galaxy that the elder species would not bow to anyone. It was the last vote the High Council would ever take. The human fleet advanced through conquered space like a tide that could not be turned. Every battle ended the same way. Conquered ships were disabled, their crews left alive, their commanders given the same message that Aura had received. Surrender and be left in peace. Resist and be pushed aside. Some systems chose surrender. Their leaders saw the writing on the stars and decided that survival was more important than pride. Human ships passed through these systems without firing a shot, leaving behind only communication buoys that broadcast humanity's message of peaceful return. Other systems chose to fight. Their fleets met the same fate as auras, reduced to drifting hulks in a matter of minutes. Their planets were not attacked, their people were not harmed, but their ability to resist was stripped away completely. Admiral watched the conquest unfold from the bridge of the Remembrance. She took no pleasure in it. Every battle, every disabled ship, every fearful face on a communication screen reminded her of the weight of what humanity was doing. They had the power to destroy, and they were choosing not to. But the choice was never easy. The temptation to strike back, to repay 10,000 years of suffering with fire and blood, whispered in the back of her mind constantly. Her first officer, Commander David, stood beside her as they watched another conquered fleet fall before them. He was a quiet man with dark skin and thoughtful eyes, descended from a family of scholars who had preserved human history through the long exile. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. Considered the question. "I feel tired," she admitted. "I feel the weight of every ancestor who dreamed of this moment. I feel the temptation to hate and the exhaustion of choosing not to." "The crews are talking," said. "They are proud of what we are doing, not the conquering, the mercy." Nodded slowly. "That is what matters, not that we returned, not that we won, but that we returned as something better than what exiled us." The fleet pressed on, drawing closer to Earth with each passing day. The Conquered's resistance crumbled before them. The elder species, so used to being obeyed, had no idea how to handle an enemy that could not be stopped but would not destroy them. Their ancient playbook had no chapter for this scenario. And at the heart of it all, blue and beautiful, Earth waited. The world that had been stolen. The world that had been turned into a playground for conquered elites. The world that humanity had dreamed of for 10,000 years. Home. The day humanity set foot on Earth again began with silence. The last conquered defense platforms hung dead in orbit, their systems disabled by electromagnetic pulses that left them drifting like abandoned shells. The luxury shuttles that had elder species tourists to the planet's surface were grounded, their passengers huddled in their resorts, unsure whether to flee or surrender or hide. Admiral had given strict orders. No one was to land on Earth until the surface was secure. No one was to harm the conquered citizens who remained there. And the first human to touch the soil would not be a soldier or a commander, but a scientist. Someone who had dedicated their life to studying the lost. Someone who would approach the moment with the reverence it deserved. Dr. Samuel was 93 years old. In a civilization that had extended human to several centuries, he was still considered young enough for field work. He had spent 60 years studying Earth from corrupted archives and fragmentary records, piecing together a picture of a world he had never seen. He knew the names of every continent, every ocean, every major mountain range. He could describe the migration patterns of creatures that had been extinct for. He had dedicated his entire existence to understanding a planet that existed only in stories and dreams. When offered him the honor of being the first human to return to Earth, he had wept. The shuttle descended through clouds that had only ever seen in ancient photographs. Below him, the African continent spread out like a rumpled green blanket, its forests and savannas restored to something approaching their original glory by Concord, who had wanted to create a perfect pleasure garden. The irony was not lost on him. The elder species had worked for centuries to undo the environmental damage that pre-exile humans had caused, transforming Earth into a pristine wilderness dotted with elegant resorts. They had done it for themselves, not for humanity, but the result was the same. Earth was beautiful again. The shuttle touched down in a region that the old records called the Serengeti, stood at the door for a long moment, his heart pounding, his breath caught in his throat. Through the window, he could see golden grass swaying in a gentle breeze, and beyond it, the distant shapes of animals that his ancestors had known only from memory. He opened the door. Warm air rushed in, carrying scents that triggered something deep in his genetic memory. Soil and grass and the distant hint of water, the smell of home. Samuel stepped out of the shuttle and placed his feet on Earth's surface for the first time in his family's history. For the first time in 10,000 years. He knelt in the grass, pressing his palms flat against the ground, and he wept. Behind him, the shuttle's communication system broadcast his words to every human vessel in the fleet, to every settlement in the moons of exile, to every corner of human civilization. "We are home," he said, his voice breaking. "After 10,000 years, we are finally home." Across the fleet, millions of humans heard those words and wept with him. Some fell to their knees in prayer. Some embraced each other in silence. Some simply stared at their screens, unable to process the magnitude of what was happening. The dream that had sustained their people through the darkest years of exile had finally come true. In the days that followed, the transition began. Human ships took up positions in Earth's orbit, their weapons powered down, their crews preparing for a new role as guardians rather than conquerors. Shuttles descended to the surface in carefully coordinated waves, carrying scientists and engineers and ordinary people who simply wanted to breathe their air. The conquered citizens who remained on Earth were treated with careful courtesy. They were given the choice to leave peacefully or to stay as guests while new arrangements were made. Most chose to leave, their vacation interrupted by circumstances beyond their control. A few chose to stay, curious about the species that had emerged from exile so transformed. Admiral herself did not land on Earth for 3 days. She remained on the Remembrance, coordinating the occupation and managing communications with the shattered remains of the conquered government. When she finally descended, it was to a small village on the coast of what had once been called Japan, the ancestral home of her family. The village had been transformed into a resort catering to conquered tourists who found human architecture quaint and charming. The buildings were reconstructions, built from old plans that the conquered had preserved as curiosities. Paper walls and wooden frames, nothing like the high-technology environments that humans now called home. But too, they were beautiful. She walked through the empty streets alone, her guards keeping a respectful distance. The wind carried the smell of salt and cherry blossoms, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear waves breaking against a shore. Her great-great-great-grandmother had been born in a place like this, 10,000 years ago, before the exile changed everything. She found a small shrine at the edge of the village, overlooking the sea. It had been preserved as a tourist attraction, but someone had left fresh flowers at its base. Perhaps one of the human scientists who had arrived before her. Perhaps a conquered visitor who had felt something they did not understand. Knelt before the shrine and closed her eyes. She thought of her ancestors, all the generations who had lived and died in exile, dreaming of this moment. She thought of her grandmother, who had told her stories of Earth as a child, painting pictures with words of a world neither of them had ever seen. She thought of the weight of responsibility that had settled on her shoulders, the duty to ensure that humanity's return was worthy of all those who had sacrificed to make it possible. "We made it," she whispered. "We came home, and we did it the right way." The wind stirred the flowers at the shrine's base, and for a moment could almost believe that her ancestors were listening. The formal end of the conflict came 2 weeks later. The conquered High Council, reduced to a ceremonial body with no real power, officially recognized humanity's claim to Earth and their status as equals in galactic society. The treaty was signed in the same chamber where the original exile had been decreed, now filled with human diplomats and military officers who stood as living proof of how wrong the elder species had been. Spoke at the ceremony, her words broadcast across the galaxy. 10,000 years ago, the conquered exiled humanity because they feared what we might become. They believed that isolation and hardship would break us, would reduce us to nothing, would erase us from the pages of history. She paused, looking around at the ancient faces of the conquered representatives. They were right to fear us. We have become powerful beyond their imagination. We could destroy everything they have built. We could scatter their people as they scattered ours. We could repay every cruelty with cruelty 1,000-fold. Her voice softened. But that is not who we are. The exile did not break us. It forged us. It taught us that strength without wisdom is worthless. It taught us that revenge only perpetuates the cycle of pain. It taught us that the true measure of a civilization is not what it can destroy, but what it can build. She stepped forward, extending her hand to the eldest of the conquered representatives, a whose face was lined with age and defeat. We do not ask for your submission. We ask for your partnership. We do not want to replace one tyranny with another. We want to build a galaxy where no species is exiled for being different, where no people are crushed because they dare to dream. The took her hand. His grip was weak with age, but his eyes held something that might have been hope. We have much to answer for, he said quietly. We were wrong about everything. Then help us make it right, replied. That is all we ask. The treaty was signed. The war, such as it was, officially ended, and humanity began the long process of rebuilding not just but their relationship with a galaxy that had once cast them out. In the years that followed, Earth was transformed. The resort complexes were dismantled, their materials recycled into new construction. The artificial gardens were allowed to rewild, returning to something closer to their natural state. Cities rose where ancient ones had stood, blending the advanced technology that humanity had developed in exile with architectural traditions preserved through oral history and fragmentary records. Humans came from the moons of exile in waves, some to settle permanently on Earth, others simply to visit the world their ancestors had dreamed of. They walked through forests and swam in oceans and climbed mountains that existed outside of simulation for the first time in their lives. They planted gardens and built homes and raised children who would grow up knowing both the harsh moons that had forged their people and the blue world that had always been their true home. And throughout the galaxy, things began to change. The conquered's grip on younger species loosened, then released entirely. New civilizations emerged from under the boot of elder species control, free to develop in their own ways. Trade routes opened. Alliances formed. The old order gave way to something new and uncertain but full of possibility. Humanity stood at the center of it all, no longer exiles, no longer conquerors, but something else entirely. They had proven that power did not require cruelty. They had shown that mercy was not weakness. They had demonstrated that a people could endure the worst that the universe had to offer and emerge not broken but transformed. Dr. Samuel lived to be nearly 300 years old. He spent most of that time on Earth, studying the world he loved with an intensity that never faded. On the last day of his life, he returned to the Serengeti, to the spot where he had first touched the soil of humanities. His great found him there, sitting in the grass, watching the sun set over a land that had welcomed his people home. Was it worth it? One of them asked. All the suffering, all the years in exile, was it worth it to end up here? Smiled, his ancient face creasing with joy. Every moment, he said, every tear, every loss, it all led to this, to home. He closed his eyes, and his breath slowed, and he passed from the world with the smell of grass and earth surrounding him. The stars watched, as they always had. They had seen humanity's shame and humanity's exile and humanity's return. And now they watched as a species that had been cast out rose to take its place among the great civilizations of the galaxy, not through conquest or destruction, but through a power that the elder species had never understood. The power of hope, the power of endurance, the power of choosing to be better. Humanity had returned to its, too powerful for anyone to halt. And in the end, that power had been used not to destroy, but to heal.